Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Whether you have returned tonight or have only just discovered this channel, this is a quiet place to slow down, learn something gentle, and allow the day to slowly fade into the background. Tonight, we are exploring vines. A vine may begin as a thin green shoot rising only a few centimeters above the soil. Beside it, a young tree may already be thickening its trunk, building layers of wood that will one day hold thousands of leaves above the ground. The vine follows a different plan. Instead of spending years building a strong column of its own, it searches for a structure that already exists. That structure might be the stem of a shrub, the rough bark of a tree, a fallen branch, a stone wall, a fence, or even another vine. Once it finds something suitable, it begins to climb. This simple difference changes almost every part of the plant's life. A tree must carry its own weight. Its trunk must resist gravity, wind, heavy rain, snow, and the pull of branches extending in different directions. A vine can remain far thinner because much of that work is performed by its surroundings. It is almost as though the plant borrows a skeleton. The vine still has to produce stems, leaves, roots, and water-carrying tissues. But it does not need to build a wide wooden tower beneath every patch of foliage. That can allow it to put more of its growth into length. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find this calm corner of science, one sleepy listener at a time. The result of this borrowed support can be surprisingly large. English ivy can climb roughly 30 meters when it finds a tall enough tree or wall. A vanilla plant, which is actually a climbing orchid, may extend for about 15 meters through a humid tropical forest or plantation. Woody tropical vines called lianas can travel from the forest floor into the crowns of mature trees, where their leaves open in sunlight far above their original roots. Yet no two vines need to climb in exactly the same way. A hop plant wraps its whole stem around a pole or string. A pea produces narrow tendrils that curl around twigs. Virginia creeper forms small adhesive pads at the ends of its tendrils, allowing it to cling to bark, stone, and brick. English ivy produces many short roots along its stem. These are called adventitious roots, meaning that they grow from the stem rather than from the plant's main underground root system. They press against rough surfaces and help hold the plant in place. Climbing roses and brambles use a less exact method. Their prickles catch against branches and reduce backward slipping as the stems lean across surrounding plants. Rattan palms, which grow mainly in tropical Asia and Africa, can use long, hooked structures to catch nearby vegetation. Some rattan stems climb for many meters while remaining flexible enough to bend through a crowded forest. Each method solves the same basic problem. The plant needs light. Near the forest floor, taller leaves may block most direct sunlight. A vine can begin in that shade, attach itself to an existing support, and gradually move its leaves toward brighter air. But this approach carries a risk. A tree can stand where it grows. A vine must find something that can carry it. The support must be close enough to reach, strong enough to hold increasing weight, and shaped in a way that matches the plant's climbing method. A thin tendril may wrap easily around a narrow twig, but fail against a broad trunk. A twining stem may climb a pole, but slide against a smooth wall. A root climbing ivy can use a wide surface, but it still needs cracks, texture, or tiny uneven places where its attachment roots can gain a hold. If the branch breaks, the vine may fall with it. If a tree is blown down, several connected vines may be pulled toward the ground at once. If the young shoot finds nothing, it may trail across the soil, redirect its growth, or produce another searching stem. So the vine's design is both efficient and dependent. It saves the cost of building a massive support system, but it must live in a world filled with structures it can use. This strategy has appeared again and again in plants that are not close relatives. Grapes, peas, hops, passion flowers, ivy, climbing ferns, orchids, palms, beans, cucumbers, and morning glories all climb. Yet they belong to very different branches of plant life. They are united less by ancestry than by a shared solution. Each has found a way to rise without standing entirely alone. And before the many coils, roots, hooks, and tendrils can make sense, it helps to understand what the word vine truly describes. Those climbing tools are scattered across branches of plant life that separated from one another deep in evolutionary time. A grapevine is not a close botanical version of English ivy. Hops belong to the hemp family, while peas and beans belong to the legume family. Clematis belongs to the buttercup family, and rattan comes from a group of palms. Their stems may twist through the same hedge, yet their shared climbing habit does not come from one recent climbing ancestor. The word vine describes a way of growing. Botanists use many familiar plant words in this practical way. A tree usually supports a tall, long-lived body with a woody trunk. A shrub normally produces several woody stems closer to the ground. An herb has softer tissues that contain little permanent wood above the soil. These forms can appear in many unrelated plant families. Vines follow the same pattern. They are plants that lengthen across the ground or climb by using outside support. The term covers soft garden plants, thick tropical climbers, and many forms between them. More than 130 plant families contain species with a climbing habit. That number shows how often evolution has arrived at this solution. Some vines complete most of their growth within one warm season. Peas, beans, cucumbers, and morning glories usually have soft stems with relatively little wood. Plants of this kind are called herbaceous vines. The word herbaceous simply means that the above-ground growth remains soft, rather than developing into a heavy wooden trunk. A pea vine may rise along a garden fence for a few months, flower, produce seeds, and die when frost arrives. A woody climber can continue adding growth for many years. Forest scientists often call this kind of vine a liana. Lianas begin with roots in the soil and use trees or other supports to carry their long stems upward. Some tropical lianas become thicker than a person's arm. Their upper leaves may spread through a crown tens of meters above the place where the stem first entered the soil. The boundary between these forms is not always sharp. A young plant may begin as a self-supporting shrub and later lean into nearby vegetation. Its longer branches can then behave like climbing stems. Other plants scramble upward without forming a tight coil or a firm adhesive bond. Roses and brambles often grow this way. Their arching stems rest across neighboring plants, while backward-pointing prickles reduce slipping. Some climbing plants eventually lose their original connection with the ground. New roots may form higher on the plant, or old lower stems may die after the upper body has become established elsewhere. The climbing habit can therefore change during one plant's life. Even the familiar word tendril hides several different structures. A developmental survey of flowering plants identified 17 broad tendril types. In peas, the curling tendrils develop from parts of a leaf. Several leaflets that might otherwise have formed flat green surfaces become thin, sensitive strands. Other climbers transform only the tip of a leaf. Clematis can use a petiole, which is the narrow stalk connecting a leaf blade to the stem. The petiole bends around a support and becomes firmer after contact. Grapevines produce tendrils connected to the plant's shoot and flower-bearing system. They occupy positions opposite the leaves and share their developmental history with branching structures that can also produce flower clusters. Passion flowers use tendrils derived from shoots. Other species form gripping organs from branches or from parts of structures that would normally carry flowers. The outward result can look nearly identical. A thin green strand circles a twig, touches it, and begins to coil. Inside the plant, however, that strand may represent a modified leaflet in one species and a modified shoot in another. This repeated appearance of similar traits in unrelated organisms is called convergent evolution. The process occurs when separate lineages face similar conditions and gradually develop comparable solutions. Birds, bats, and insects evolved wings through different anatomical routes. Climbing plants have done something similar, with stems, roots, leaves, and tendrils. The pattern reaches beyond ordinary flowering plants. Species of Lygodium, known as climbing ferns, extend flexible leaf stalks that twist around surrounding vegetation. The plant may appear to have a climbing stem, though much of the visible climbing structure is actually part of one enormous divided leaf. Species of Natum provide an even more distant example. Natum is a gymnosperm, placing it in the broad seed plant group that also includes conifers. Several tropical species grow as woody climbers and rise through forests in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. A pea, a grape, a climbing fern, and a woody Natum vine arrived at climbing through separate evolutionary histories. Their similarities point back to the same physical pressure. Sunlight often waits above layers of competing leaves, while building a trunk strong enough to reach it demands years of material and growth. That pressure begins with the material cost of staying upright. A young tree must do far more than lift a few leaves toward the sun. As its crown grows wider, the trunk must carry the weight of every branch, leaf, flower, and fruit held above the ground. It must remain stable during heavy rain and resist the repeated pull of wind. A mature tree may perform this work for decades or even centuries. The trunk therefore needs strength that lasts. Much of that strength begins in the walls surrounding each plant cell. Cellulose forms long fibers that help create the basic framework of those walls. It is also the main material used to make paper and cotton cloth. A second substance called lignin is added to many supporting and water-carrying cells. Lignin makes the walls stiffer and more resistant to water. It allows wood to stay firm while streams of water move upward through the tree. As a trunk thickens, it adds new layers of water-conducting tissue called xylem. Older xylem gradually becomes part of the wood that supports the growing crown. Producing this tissue requires carbon captured from the air, minerals taken from the soil, water carried through the roots, and energy produced in the leaves. Those materials are limited. Carbon used to thicken a trunk cannot be used at the same moment to extend a young shoot or open another leaf. A vine follows a different balance. Its tissues still contain cellulose and lignin. Woody lianas can produce thick, strong stems that survive for many years. Their bodies generally place a smaller share of their total growth into a dense, self-supporting trunk. A larger share can go into leaves and long stems that travel through surrounding vegetation. Scientists often describe this growth in terms of biomass. Biomass simply means the amount of living material contained in an organism. Two plants may have similar amounts of biomass while dividing it very differently. One may hold much of its material in a thick trunk. The other may spread a greater share through long stems and broad areas of foliage. A young climbing shoot can also stretch the spaces between its leaves. Each place where a leaf, bud, or branch attaches to a stem is called a node. The length of stem between two nodes is an internode. Long internodes allow a vine to cross a shaded gap without building a new leaf every few centimeters. This keeps the growing tip lighter and places more of the plant's limited material into forward extension. Once the vine reaches brighter conditions, it can produce more leaves and increase the amount of sunlight it captures. Access to a suitable support often improves a climber's growth. Supported plants can become larger and may produce more flowers, fruit, or seeds than individuals left trailing across the ground. The difference makes sense. A supported stem can place its leaves above nearby vegetation without constructing the full wooden column that a tree would need. The advantage still depends on local conditions. A well-supported vine growing in moist soil may extend quickly. Another individual of the same species may grow slowly during drought, in poor soil, or under cold temperatures. Different species also divide their resources in different ways. Some vines invest heavily in underground roots. Others produce short-lived shoots during one growing season. A woody liana may spend years strengthening stems that already reach the canopy. The climbing habit creates opportunity, rather than a guarantee of speed. Its greatest weakness appears when the outside support fails. A searching shoot may cross open space and find nothing within reach. A tendril may touch a trunk too wide to encircle. A twining stem may meet a smooth wall that offers no narrow object around which it can turn. The vine may continue outward until its own weight pulls the tip downward. A branch can also break after the plant has climbed onto it. The attached vine may fall several meters while remaining rooted in the soil. In a tropical forest, one liana can pass through the crowns of several trees. When a heavily connected tree falls during a storm, the vine can pull on neighboring branches and carry parts of its own canopy back toward the ground. A tree pays heavily for independence. A vine saves part of that cost by depending on structures already present around it. Its thin stem carries less wood because another plant, rock face, or human-built frame supplies much of the support. That economy works only after contact has been made. Until then, the vine's newest growth must move through open space and somehow increase its chance of finding something solid. A young shoot rarely advances along one fixed line. Its newest few centimeters may lean to one side, rise again, and then bend toward a different part of the surrounding air. Seen at normal speed, these changes are easy to miss. A person watching for several minutes might notice nothing beyond a green tip resting beside an empty patch of space. Time-lapse photography reveals a very different movement. When several hours are compressed into a few seconds, the shoot begins to sweep around. Its tip may trace a broad circle, followed by a smaller oval or a loose loop that never closes perfectly. Some paths resemble a slowly drawn spiral. Others wander through irregular curves as the plant grows. This repeated movement is called circumnutation. The word describes the way a growing plant part bends successively in different directions, causing its tip to travel around an imagined center. Circumnutation occurs in many kinds of plants. Young sunflower stems, bean seedlings, flower stalks, and growing roots can all show smaller versions of it. For a climbing plant, the movement has a particularly useful result. Each sweep carries the tip through a larger volume of space than straight growth would cover. A support several centimeters to one side may eventually enter the shoot's path. The motion comes from the growing tissues near the tip. Plant cells are surrounded by firm walls, but those walls can loosen while the cells are young. Water enters, internal pressure rises, and the cells lengthen. When cells on one side of a stem lengthen slightly more than cells on the opposite side, the stem bends away from the faster growing side. The difference may be tiny within each cell. Across thousands of cells, it can move the tip through a wide arc. The zone of stronger growth gradually shifts around the stem. Expansion may become greater on the eastern side for a time, then move toward the northern side, followed later by another part of the stem. As that pattern travels around the circumference, the tip changes direction again and again. The final path rarely forms a perfect circle. Gravity continually influences the orientation of the stem. Light arriving more strongly from one direction can shift the pattern of growth. Temperature changes the speed of cell activity, while the plant's internal daily rhythms also affect movement. A cool night may slow the sweep. Warm daylight can make the same shoot travel around its path more quickly. Charles Darwin measured this movement in climbing plants during the 19th century. While studying the common hop, he followed the positions of young shoots and recorded the time needed for each full revolution. Across 7 observations made during warm daytime conditions, the average revolution lasted about 2 hours and 8 minutes. The plant was moving slowly enough to appear still, yet quickly enough to complete several broad sweeps between morning and evening. Darwin also noticed that movement belonged mainly to the youngest growing portions. A hop shoot is divided into sections called internodes, the lengths of stem between 2 points where leaves or buds emerge. The newest internodes near the tip continued to revolve while they were lengthening. Older sections gradually slowed as their tissues matured. Once an internode had finished most of its extension, it became firmer and stopped tracing large circles. New growth above it continued the search. This creates a traveling zone of movement. The lower stem settles into place, while the upper tip remains flexible. As more stem is produced, the active region shifts forward without requiring the whole vine to twist through the air. The plant can therefore keep its older growth relatively stable while its newest tissues explore nearby space. In a dense meadow or forest edge, the moving tip may pass through leaves, touch several stems, and brush against surfaces that cannot support it. Many contacts last only a moment. A flexible grass blade may bend away. A wide tree trunk may be impossible for a small tendril to surround. A dead twig may break under the first pull. The sweeping motion increases the number of possible encounters, though each climbing structure can use only certain objects. A circling tip is searching through geometry as much as space. The useful support must lie within reach, remain strong under weight, and fit the size and method of the plant's grip. The circling tip reaches a thin twig first. Its surface is firm, the diameter is narrow, and the wood remains steady when touched. For a vine equipped with a tendril, this can be an excellent match. The tendril needs to curve far enough around the object for its tip to cross its own path. A garden wire, a narrow branch, or a blade-like stem may all fit inside that bending range. A broad tree trunk presents a different problem. The same tendril may press against the bark and begin to bend, yet run out of length before it can form a secure loop. Touch has occurred, but the geometry does not allow a complete grip. Twining vines face a similar limit. Their entire stem must bend around the support, so the object needs to be narrow enough for the growing shoot to form a helix. A young bean may wind easily around string. The same stem placed against a wide wooden post may continue searching without completing a turn. Diameter is only one part of the match. A smooth wall offers almost nothing for a twining stem to surround. Rough bark contains ridges and cracks, though these details help only when the plant has a structure capable of using them. English ivy can press many short climbing roots into tiny uneven spaces. Virginia creeper uses small adhesive discs that spread against a surface. Both methods allow a plant to climb something far wider than any tendril could encircle. The support must also remain stiff enough to carry increasing weight. A circling shoot may touch a thin grass stem and begin leaning against it. The grass bends, lowering both plants toward the ground. A young shrub may hold the vine during its first week of growth, then sag after the climber produces more leaves. Wind adds another test. A support that swings through a wide arc may repeatedly pull on a new attachment before it has strengthened. The useful object therefore has several physical qualities. Its width must suit the climbing organ. Its surface must offer the right kind of contact. The angle and distance affect whether the shoot can reach it, while stiffness determines whether it remains upright after the vine begins transferring weight. Many climbing plants extend long shoots beyond their established leaves. These are often called searcher shoots. They may carry small leaves or leave longer spaces between them, keeping the outer portion light. A heavy tip would bend downward sooner under its own weight. A lighter one can project farther into open space and sweep through a larger area before gravity draws it back. Searcher shoots are easy to notice on houseplants, such as monsteras and pothos. One stem may extend well beyond the main cluster of leaves, with its newest growth pointing into the room. In a forest, a similar shoot may pass between branches until it encounters a trunk a hanging vine, or the edge of another tree's crown. The growing tip has no eyes, yet it responds to several kinds of information. Light affects the direction and rate of growth. Gravity influences which way the stem bends. Touch changes the behavior of sensitive tissues after contact. Humidity, temperature, and the plant's internal growth rhythms can also alter how quickly the search continues. Experiments suggest that some climbing plants adjust aspects of their approach when supports differ in position or thickness. Pea plants, for example, have been observed changing their growth patterns when researchers alter the location or size of a possible support. These findings need careful wording. The plant is regulating growth through physical and chemical signals. Researchers continue to debate how much apparent targeting comes from sensing a distant support, and how much emerges from broad exploratory movement, followed by a local response after contact. Either process can produce an impressive result. A shoot that sweeps through enough space will encounter objects of many kinds. Its climbing structure then acts as a filter. Wire may work while a wall does not. Rough bark may suit a root climber while remaining useless to a small tendril. A flexible stem may be close enough to touch, but too weak to carry the vine for long. Success begins when the plant's body and the support's shape fit together. For a twining species, that fit allows the largest climbing organ available to begin its work. The whole young stem curves around the narrow support and starts turning open space into an upward spiral. The young stem presses against the narrow support and keeps moving. Its tip continues the same slow circular path that carried it through open air. Contact changes the route. Instead of passing beside the support, the growing shoot begins to travel around it. The first curve may cover only part of the surface. New growth adds another fraction of a turn. Over several hours, the stem begins forming a spiral. This kind of climbing is called twining. The whole young stem acts as the climbing organ. A hop plant can wind around a hanging string. Morning glory can wrap around a garden stake. Runner beans often climb poles, while honeysuckle coils through shrubs and fences. Wisteria can follow the same basic method on a much larger scale, producing woody stems that thicken over many years. The movement begins near the growing tip. In hops, the first few internodes above the soil may remain fairly straight. An internode is the length of stem between 2 points, where leaves or buds emerge. Younger internodes higher on the plant continue to revolve while they are still lengthening. Once one internode matures, its walls become firmer, and its large circular movement fades. Fresh growth above it keeps searching. The active zone therefore travels upward with the tip. Older stem remains wrapped around the support, while newer stem continues tracing circles above it. Each new turn places another length of the vine against the object. The final shape is a helix, similar to a spring stretched around a pole. Its exact angle depends on the growth rate of the stem, the width of the support, and the size of the circles made by the tip. A narrow pole usually allows tighter turns. A wider support forces the stem into a broader curve. The stem must be flexible enough to bend without breaking. Its flexibility also has to match the diameter it is trying to surround. A thin bean shoot may wrap closely around string, yet struggle on a thick post. A larger woody vine can sometimes follow a broader trunk, especially while its newest growth is still soft. Twining direction is often consistent within a species. Hops usually wind in one characteristic direction. Runner beans commonly wind in the opposite direction. The description can become confusing because a spiral appears to reverse when viewed from the other end. Looking downward from the top of a pole gives a different visual direction from looking upward from the ground. For that reason, botanists often describe the direction only after stating the observer's viewpoint. The direction comes from the plant's internal pattern of growth. One side of the young stem lengthens slightly more than another. That zone of stronger growth shifts around the stem, continuing the revolving motion. After contact, the support blocks part of the path. The tip keeps moving around the obstacle, and continued lengthening carries the shoot into repeated turns. The helix creates stability through contact and friction. A straight stem leaning against a pole could slide downward. A coiled stem touches the support across several turns. Its weight is spread along a greater length, and each curve helps resist slipping. Wind may move the upper shoot, but the lower coils keep much of the plant close to the support. The vine gains this hold without producing glue. It also avoids building separate hooks or pads. The attachment remains mechanical. If the support is removed while the stem is young, the coil may loosen or change shape. Older twining stems often become firmer as their tissues mature. Wisteria shows how powerful this arrangement can become. A young wisteria shoot begins as a flexible green stem. Over time, it adds woody tissue and becomes much thicker. Where several stems coil around the same post or tree, their expanding bodies may press tightly against one another. A support that worked well for the young plant can later become crowded by the mature vine. Hops show the more temporary version. Their above-ground stems can grow several meters during one season, using strings or poles to rise towards stronger light. The stems die back after the growing season, while underground parts survive and produce new shoots later. In both cases, twining turns exploratory motion into upward travel. The same circling that once passed through empty space now follows a fixed route. Every new internode adds height, while earlier turns carry the load below. This method keeps the main stem closely tied to one support. A plant that needs to extend beyond that route can gain greater freedom by separating the searching organ from the stem itself. A much thinner structure can reach sideways, fasten to a nearby object, and leave the growing shoot free to continue forward. A tendril gives the vine a separate tool for reaching and holding. The main stem can continue growing forward while a much thinner structure sweeps through the space beside it. Because a tendril weighs very little, it can extend away from the stem without pulling the whole shoot downward. Its narrow body can curl around twigs, wire, grass stems, or the branches of nearby plants. Once it attaches, the main stem gains support, while remaining free to keep lengthening. The familiar spiral shape makes tendrils look like one standard plant organ. Their anatomy tells a more complicated story. A tendril on a garden pea begins as part of a leaf. A normal pea leaf carries several pairs of flat leaflets along a central stalk. Near the outer end, some of those leaflets develop into thin curling strands instead of broad green surfaces. The plant gives up a small amount of leaf area and gains several lightweight gripping points. Sweet peas use a related arrangement. Their leaves end in branching tendrils that spread outward and coil around narrow supports. A sweet pea growing beside mesh may fasten several tendril branches at once, distributing its weight across different wires. Cucumbers also produce tendrils, although these arise from a different developmental pathway. A cucumber tendril appears beside a leaf at a node, which is the point where leaves and side growth join the stem. The tendril extends as a slender spiral, while the cucumber stem continues spreading across the ground, or climbing a frame. Squash and melon plants use similar-looking structures. Their resemblance to pea tendrils comes from a shared job, rather than identical anatomy. Grapevines add another version. A grape tendril usually appears opposite a leaf. Its developmental pattern is closely related to the structures that produce branches and flower clusters. Under different conditions, closely related growing tissues may form a tendril or part of an inflorescence. An inflorescence is the branching structure that carries a group of flowers. Those flowers can later become a cluster of grapes. The connection between tendrils and flower-bearing structures can sometimes be seen in intermediate forms. One part may curl like a tendril, while another part carries small flowers. These mixed structures preserve clues about the tendril's origin. Passion flowers use shoot-derived tendrils. A young passion flower stem grows forward while a slender tendril emerges near a leaf. The tendril begins sweeping through nearby space before the main stem reaches the same position. Cobea, often called cup and saucer vine, uses branching tendrils formed from parts of its leaves. The tips divide into several fine gripping branches, allowing one leaf to contact more than one point on a support. Other plants turn the tip of a leaf into a climbing organ. Some species use the petiole, the narrow stalk that connects a leaf blade to the stem. Clematis provides a familiar example. Its flexible leaf stalk can bend around a twig and gradually become firmer after attachment. A comparative study of flowering plants recognized 17 broad tendril types. Across those types, tendrils may develop from whole leaves, individual leaflets, leaf tips, petioles, branches, shoots, flower stalks, or the main axis of flower-bearing structures. The final shapes often become difficult to distinguish by appearance alone. A thin green coil on one plant may represent modified leaf tissue. A nearly identical coil on another may have developed from a shoot. Evolution works with structures already present in an organism's development. Small changes in when tissues grow, where growth occurs, and which cells remain flexible can gradually reshape an ordinary organ. A flat leaflet can become narrow and sensitive. A side shoot can stop producing leaves and specialize in attachment. A leaf stalk can remain flexible long enough to wrap around a branch. Intermediate forms help botanists trace these changes. Some species produce tendrils that still carry tiny leaf blades. Others form partial branches with curling tips. A flower-related tendril may occasionally produce a small blossom. These details reveal a gradual modification of existing organs across many generations. The 17 tendril types therefore represent several evolutionary routes toward the same mechanical result. Peas, grapes, cucumbers, passion flowers, sweet peas, and cobea All gain small searching structures that reduce the burden placed on the main stem. Their tendrils look similar because each must remain light, flexible, and narrow enough to surround a support. The true difference becomes visible only after tracing each coil back to the part of the plant from which it grew. Shape explains how a tendril reaches outward. Its response after contact depends on something deeper. A light touch against one small region can alter the behavior of cells along the tendril and begin drawing the entire structure around a support. The tendril brushes the side of a narrow twig. For a few moments, its shape appears unchanged. Pressure has already bent a small group of cells near the point of contact. That mechanical force begins a chain of events inside the tissue. Many tendrils are most sensitive near their outer region, close to the tip. A touch near the base may produce little response, while gentle pressure farther along can begin a visible curve. This uneven sensitivity helps the searching end react before the rest of the structure becomes involved. The response is called thigmotropism. The first part of the word refers to touch. Tropism means directional growth caused by a stimulus. A tendril showing thigmotropism changes its growth according to where physical contact occurs. The movement develops through plant cells rather than muscles. Plant cells contain fluid enclosed by a membrane and surrounded by a firm outer wall. Touch slightly deforms those membranes and walls. Proteins within the cell membrane can respond to the strain by opening channels that allow electrically charged particles, called ions, to move. Calcium ions are especially important in many plant signaling systems. Their concentration can rise within touched cells and help carry information into neighboring tissue. Small electrical changes may also travel away from the contact point. These signals interact with water pressure inside the cells. Water entering or leaving a cell alters turgor, the internal pressure that pushes the cell membrane against its wall. Changes in turgor can produce an early bend before slower growth makes the new curve more secure. Hormones also take part. Auxin, a plant hormone involved in growth, can become distributed unevenly across bending tissues. Other chemical messengers affect how easily cell walls loosen and how strongly cells expand. No single signal controls the whole reaction by itself. Electrical activity, calcium movement, water pressure, hormones, and changes in the cell wall overlap across different stages. Together, these processes create unequal behavior on opposite sides of the tendril. Cells on one side may lengthen more quickly. Growth on the contacted side may slow, while the outer side continues extending. The difference gradually carries the tendril around the twig. Sensitive species can begin reacting surprisingly soon. Measured response times range from roughly 25 seconds to about 10 minutes, depending on the plant, the strength of the touch, temperature, age of the tendril, and the method used to detect movement. A reaction inside the cells may begin before the curve becomes easy to see. The complete wrap can take much longer. A passion flower tendril may first rest against a support, then form a visible hook over the following minutes or hours. Continued contact causes more of the tendril to bend around the object. Later growth makes the attachment firmer. Brief contact does not always produce the same result. A passing leaf may brush the tendril as wind moves through the plant. The touched cells can respond. yet the stimulus may end before a lasting coil develops. A firm twig remains in place. Repeated pressure at the same point strengthens the directional response and allows the curve to continue. The surface of the object also matters. A narrow support keeps touching the tendril as the first hook forms. That curved contact brings nearby parts of the tendril against the same object, spreading the response farther along its length. The plant gradually surrounds more of the twig. Experiments with tendrils often use thin rods, thread, or controlled pressure from a small tool. Researchers can touch one region and measure the time before bending begins. They can also alter temperature, hydration, or the age of the tissue. Young tendrils usually respond more strongly because their cells are still capable of rapid expansion. Older tendrils become less sensitive as their walls stiffen and active growth slows. The process gives the plant more precision than random entanglement would provide. Circumnutation carries the tendril through nearby space. Physical contact then changes the direction of growth at one particular location. A suitable support becomes wrapped because its pressure alters the cells touching it. The first curve prevents the tendril from drifting away as easily. Even so, a simple loop may leave several centimeters between the vine stem and the support. Wind can pull at that loose connection, while the weight of new leaves places greater force on it. The remaining free length must shorten and tighten, turning the first gentle wrap into a spring that draws the vine closer. The loose section between the support and the stem begins to change shape. The part touching the twig has already wrapped around it. Farther back, the free length of tendril starts curling around its own center. These are two separate movements. Contact coiling forms the first grip around the support. Free coiling shortens the remaining distance between that grip and the vine. As the new coils tighten, the stem is drawn inward. A gap of several centimeters can become much smaller without the tendril releasing its hold. The attachment begins carrying tension, much like a stretched spring connecting two points. Blue passionflower provides a clear example. Its tendrils can shorten by as much as about 1/3 of their original straight length. A tendril that began 12 centimeters long could therefore pull its two ends roughly 4 centimeters closer together. That change may be enough to lift a flexible shoot, steady a leaf, or reduce how far the vine swings in the wind. Modern experiments have measured the force created during this process. Blue passionflower tendrils produced forces ranging from about 6 to 140 millinewtons. A millinewton is 1/1000th of a newton, the standard scientific unit used to measure force. The numbers sound small until they are compared with the weight being moved. The stem and leaves attached to one node in the experiment pulled downward with a force of about 7 millinewtons. Even a tendril near the lower end of the measured range could support part of that load. A stronger tendril could pull the shoot upward against gravity and hold it close to the support. The shape of the spring contains an unusual detail. One part of the tendril often coils in one direction, while another part coils the opposite way. Between them lies a short region where the spiral reverses. This reversal is called a perversion. The name sounds dramatic, though it simply describes a change in the direction of the coil. The reversal forms because both ends of the tendril are constrained. One end is attached to the vine. the other has gripped the support. If the entire tendril twisted in one direction, one of those fixed ends would also need to rotate. A reversal allows the tendril to form many coils, without turning the whole stem or unwinding its grip. The result resembles an old telephone cord with one section spiraling one way and a nearby section spiraling the other. Early in this process, water inside the cells plays a major role. Plant cells contain fluid pressing outward against their walls. This internal pressure is called turgor. Well-hydrated cells remain firm and can transmit force through the tendril. When water availability changes, the tension can change quickly. In one monitored experiment, watering produced measurable changes in tendril force within less than 10 minutes. Water moved into the plant, cell pressure shifted, and the spring responded before any large amount of new tissue could grow. Hydration alone cannot preserve the attachment for the rest of the season. As the tendril matures, some of its cell walls become strengthened with lignin. Lignin is the same stiffening material found in wood and in many water-carrying tissues. It spreads through the central parts of the older tendril and makes the coil more rigid. The young spring begins as a living structure whose force depends heavily on water pressure and active cells. Later tissue changes give it a more permanent shape. The mature tendril can remain curled even after its sensitivity has faded, and most of its growth has ended. This transition allows the plant to move first and stabilize afterward. A soft young tendril can search through nearby space without snapping. Once it finds support, unequal growth and contraction create the curved spring. Lignified tissues then help preserve that geometry, while new leaves and stems add weight. The finished coil absorbs movement as well. A rigid connection could transfer every gust directly into the stem. A spring can lengthen slightly, twist, and then return toward its resting shape. That flexibility reduces sudden pulling at the attachment point. The small curl beside a leaf has now become a measured load-bearing structure. It senses contact, changes its growth, pulls the plant inward, and gradually locks itself into place. Its success still depends on finding an object narrow enough to surround. A wide trunk, flat wall, or broad slab of stone demands a completely different kind of attachment. A tendril reaching a mature tree trunk may touch solid bark and still find no way around it. The curve that worked on a twig cannot close around an object wider than the tendril's full reach. A twining stem faces the same limit beside a stone wall. The surface may rise for several meters, yet the plant has no narrow center around which to form a spiral. Some vines solve this problem by spreading their grip across the surface. Virginia creeper, known to botanists as Parthenocyssus quinquefolia, produces branched tendrils with small structures at their tips. When one of these tips touches bark, stone, or brick, it changes shape. The tip flattens and enlarges into an adhesive disc. Several discs may form along one branched tendril. Each disc covers only a small area, though the combined attachment can hold the stem firmly against a wall. Boston ivy uses a related method. Its tendrils place many small pads against the surface, creating a pattern of separate contact points rather than one large grip. The strength comes from distribution. A single attachment may carry only part of the load. Several pads spread the vine's weight across different places and reduce the force placed on any one point. Surface texture also matters. A rough stone wall contains pits, edges, and microscopic uneven areas. The growing pad can press into these details and increase the amount of surface it touches. Adhesive substances produced by the plant help maintain contact as the pad matures. The result resembles a set of small biological anchors arranged along the stem. English ivy uses roots instead of tendril pads. Short roots appear along the side of a climbing stem, wherever it presses near a suitable surface. These are called adventitious roots. The word adventitious means that the roots arise from an unusual location, such as a stem, rather than developing as part of the original underground root system. Hundreds of these small roots can form along a length of ivy. Fine root hairs enter tiny cracks and irregular spaces in bark or masonry. The roots also produce adhesive material that helps bind them to the surface. Each root contributes a small amount of grip. Together, they create a broad attachment zone capable of supporting a long stem and many leaves. These climbing roots usually serve a mechanical purpose. An ivy stem resting against a tree does not automatically enter the tree's water-carrying tissues. Its main underground roots continue gathering water and minerals from the soil. The tree supplies height and a textured surface. The ivy remains responsible for feeding and hydrating its own body. This distinction separates an ordinary root climber from a parasitic plant that penetrates a host and removes resources directly. Vanilla offers a tropical version of root climbing. Vanilla is an evergreen orchid vine native to warm parts of the Americas. A mature stem can extend for roughly 15 meters when it has enough support. Along the stem, fleshy aerial roots grow outward and press against tree bark or a plantation support. Aerial roots develop above the soil. Some remain exposed to humid air, while others flatten against the surface and help hold the vine in place. The vanilla plant may also produce roots that reach the ground, or grow into loose organic material collected around a support. Those roots take up water and dissolved minerals. The climbing roots keep the stem positioned against the tree as new sections grow upward. High humidity helps prevent these exposed tissues from drying too quickly. In commercial vanilla farms, growers often train the vines around living trees, posts, or low frames. The stem can be looped downward after reaching a manageable height, allowing workers to reach the flowers and developing pods. The support still performs the same basic service that a forest tree would provide. Adhesive climbing depends on many small physical details working together. The attachment organ must press closely against the surface. Root hairs or pads need enough texture to increase contact. Secretions help fill microscopic spaces, while the shape of the organ spreads force across a larger area. A broad trunk that defeated a tendril can therefore become a useful root. Flat rock and masonry can also carry a plant upward, without offering anything narrow enough to wrap. Other climbers use far less exact attachments. Their stems lean across surrounding plants, while hooks, prickles, or curved branches catch whatever happens to lie in their path. A series of small catches can support an entire vine, even when no single point forms a permanent bond. That kind of support can look untidy from a distance. A climbing rose may arch across a hedge, with several stems resting on branches at different heights. Blackberry canes lean through nearby shrubs and become difficult to pull backward once their prickles have caught. Neither plant wraps its whole stem into a helix. Their climb depends on repeated contact across a broad tangle. Botanists often describe roses and brambles as scramblers. A scrambler grows long stems that lean onto surrounding plants, fences, or rocks. Its prickles point outward or backward, helping the stem resist sliding toward the ground. A single prickle carries very little weight. A mature cane may touch dozens of branches and leaves along its length. Those resting points spread the load through the vegetation. Clematis uses a more controlled version of an ordinary plant part. Its leaf blade connects to the main stem through a narrow stalk, called a petiole. While young, the petiole remains flexible. When it touches a twig, it can bend around the support and gradually tighten. The leaf continues collecting sunlight while its stalk also serves as an anchor. As the tissue matures, the wrapped petiole becomes firmer and helps hold the growing stem in place. Some tropical climbers use side branches that curve around supports. These are sometimes called prehensile branches. Prehensile means able to grasp. The branch may begin as an ordinary side shoot, then bend around neighboring vegetation after contact. Other species rely on hard spines or curved hooks. Botanists studying tropical climbing plants separate these methods into several groups, including tendrils, climbing roots, prehensile branches, scramblers, spines, hooks, and whip-like climbing organs. Rattan palms provide some of the clearest examples of hooked climbing. Rattans are slender, spiny palms found mainly in tropical forests of Africa and Asia. The genus Calamus contains more than 400 accepted species. Unlike a coconut palm, which builds a thick, upright trunk, many rattans produce long, flexible stems that travel through surrounding trees. Their leaves may carry rows of sharp, backward-curving hooks. Some species produce a cirrus, a hooked extension growing from the end of a leaf. Others form a flagellum near the leaf sheath, where the leaf meets the stem. A flagellum is a long, thin climbing whip, covered with recurved hooks. As the rattan extends, the whip catches leaves, branches, and other vines. The hooks curve backward, so forward movement is easier than retreat. A New Guinea species called Calamus vestitus can climb to about 20 meters. Its flagellum may reach between roughly 1.5 and 2 meters in length. That gives the plant a wide hooked line capable of contacting vegetation well beyond the main stem. Once several hooks catch, the rattan can rest part of its weight on the surrounding canopy. Continued growth places new hooks farther ahead. Older contact points remain behind, creating a chain of support through the forest. The arrangement does not require one perfect attachment. A hook may tear free during wind. A supporting twig may bend or break. Other hooks remain engaged, while the long stem continues resting across several branches. This shared load helps explain how a loose-looking tangle can support a large climbing plant. The same principle applies to brambles. One blackberry cane may lie across a fence wire, pass through a shrub, and hook onto several smaller stems. Each point changes the direction of the load. The entire cane becomes harder to dislodge than any individual prickle would suggest. Climbing, therefore, forms a mechanical range. At one end, A passion flower tendril senses a narrow support and builds a precise spring. Near the middle, a clematis leaf stalk bends around a twig. A rattan or rose succeeds through many catches spread across a longer body. All of these methods transfer weight outward. They explain how a vine remains connected to its surroundings. The stem carrying that weight still faces its own demands. A liana may twist between moving crowns, bend sharply around a branch, and carry water from roots in the soil to leaves many meters above. Its interior must combine flexibility with transport and enough strength to survive repeated strain. The force gathered by hooks, coils, and gripping roots eventually enters the stem that carries the vine's weight. A tree trunk usually has a familiar internal pattern. When cut across, it often appears roughly circular, with a broad, woody center surrounded by thinner layers of living tissue and bark. The wood contains large amounts of xylem. Xylem is the tissue that carries water and dissolved minerals upward from the roots. Closer to the outside lies phloem, which moves sugars made in the leaves to growing stems, roots, flowers, and other parts of the plant. New conducting tissue is produced by a thin layer of dividing cells called the cambium. In many trees, this cambium forms a fairly regular ring. Year after year, it adds new xylem toward the inside and new phloem toward the outside. The result is a strong column that resists bending and supports a heavy crown. A woody liana may look very different when its stem is cut across. Some cross-sections remain nearly circular. Others are flattened, deeply lobed, angular, or divided into several separate conducting regions. One stem may resemble a bundle of smaller cables held together. Another may contain wedges of soft tissue reaching inward between harder areas of wood. These patterns have developed names because botanists encounter them repeatedly. Successive cambia occur when a plant produces more than one ring of growth-forming tissue over time. Each new cambium can create another band of xylem and phloem. The stem may end up with several conducting rings, rather than one simple central cylinder. Phloem wedges form when sections of phloem extend deep into the wood. In dispersed xylem, hard water-conducting tissue appears in separate areas instead of one solid core. Divided xylem creates larger blocks separated by softer tissue. Some lianas contain interxylary phloem, meaning that patches of sugar-carrying phloem occur within areas of xylem. Compound vascular cylinders divide the stem into several complete conducting units. Species of Surjania, a large group of tropical vines, provide striking examples. In some species, one central vascular cylinder is accompanied by several smaller cylinders around its edge. A cross-section may look almost like one thick cable, surrounded by a ring of thinner cables. Each cylinder contains tissues involved in transport and growth. This arrangement can allow different parts of the stem to keep functioning even when one region is bent or damaged. The mixture of hard and soft tissues also changes how the stem responds to force. Rigid xylem helps prevent collapse and provides channels for water. Softer tissues between woody regions allow some movement when the stem twists. A liana passing between two tree crowns may be pulled in different directions as wind moves the branches. Its stem can rub against bark, flatten around a trunk, or bend sharply over a branch. A simple rigid column would concentrate much of that strain in one place. A cable-like body can spread deformation across several tissues and conducting regions. This does not mean every unusual liana stem evolved for the same reason. Some patterns come from the plant's developmental history. Others may improve flexibility, transport, repair, or resistance to twisting. The exact advantage varies among species and environments. Botanists also use these cross-sections for identification. Certain families and genera tend to produce characteristic arrangements of wood and phloem. A stem found without leaves or flowers may still reveal its group when cut and examined. The inside can preserve a botanical signature even when the outer bark looks ordinary. Water transport remains essential throughout the structure. Leaves in the canopy may stand tens of meters above roots in the soil. Evaporation from those leaves pulls water upward through the xylem in a continuous column. If a section becomes crushed, several conducting pathways can give the plant more than one route around the damaged area. Sugars made high in the canopy must also travel through phloem toward roots and growing shoots below. The liana's internal design therefore supports both movement and supply. Climbing has shaped far more than the organs visible on the surface. The stem itself has become a flexible transport system, built to carry water through a body that bends with the forest around it. These hidden patterns remain difficult to connect with movement until botanists began following growing shoots carefully, marking their positions and recording how their paths changed over hours and days. A thin mark on glass could turn a slow movement into a path that could be measured. During the 1860s, Charles Darwin spent long periods watching climbing plants near his home at Down House in Kent. A clock beside the plant gave each change a time. The position of a growing tip could be marked against a window or recorded on paper. After an hour, the tip had shifted. Several hours later, the marks formed part of a circle or an uneven loop. Careful records made movement visible long before time-lapse cameras existed. Darwin entered a field that already had its own history. The German botanist Hugo von Moll had described the structure and movements of climbing plants earlier in the 19th century. Ludwig Palm studied twining stems and published work on their movements in 1827. The French researcher Henri Dutrochet also examined how plants respond to light, gravity, and internal changes in their tissues. Darwin read earlier accounts and tested many of their observations with living plants. His main contribution came from placing several climbing methods into one broad comparison. He watched hop stems revolving around supports and timed the length of their turns. Supports of different widths were offered to twining shoots. He noted whether a stem continued circling, began winding, or failed to hold. Direction also mattered. Some species regularly climbed in one spiral direction, while others followed the opposite path. Tender growing tips were followed until each internode stopped revolving, and newer growth above it continued the movement. Tendrils received their own tests. Darwin touched them with fine objects and watched for bending. He compared sensitive regions near the tip with less responsive regions closer to the base. Leaves that served as climbing organs were observed as their stalks curved around twigs. Root climbers were placed beside surfaces where their attachment roots could develop. The work brought twining stems, leaf climbers, tendrils, and climbing routes into the same study. Darwin also looked for forms that connected those categories. A plant using a flexible leaf stalk might resemble a tendril climber in part of its behavior. A weakly twining species could show a smaller version of the circling movement seen in a strong twiner. These gradual differences supported an evolutionary interpretation. Climbing systems could change over generations as existing stems or leaves became more specialized for support. Darwin's paper was read to the Linnean Society of London on February 2nd, 1865. It was published on June 12th of that year under the title On the Movements and Habits of Climbing Plants. A corrected and expanded second edition appeared in 1875 as The Movements and Habits of Climbing Plants. The later edition included additional observations and clearer comparisons among climbing forms. These studies depended on patience and simple measurements. A shoot could complete several movements during one day, yet each individual change remained too slow for a person to see directly. Recording position at regular intervals changed that problem. The marks preserved where the plant had been. A clock supplied the missing rate. Changes in warmth, light, watering, or support could then be compared with changes in the plant's path. Modern laboratories use faster and more precise versions of the same method. Time-lapse cameras photograph a shoot every few minutes. Computer software follows the tip across each image and reconstructs its route. Three-dimensional tracking can measure depth as well as sideways movement. Controlled growth chambers keep temperature, humidity, and light within chosen ranges. Small force sensors record the pull of a tendril while it coils. Microscopes reveal changes inside touched cells, while chemical tools track calcium signals and hormone activity. A movement that once required hours of handwritten notes can now be replayed in seconds. The sped-up plant appears active because the slow changes have been placed within a human timescale. Its circular sweep covers nearby space. Contact redirects growth. Coiling transfers weight to a support. Each visible motion serves the same larger task. A vine beginning near the soil must cross a shaded layer of stems and leaves before its own foliage can reach stronger light above. Seen through time-lapse, the young vine's path begins to look less like a series of isolated movements and more like one continuous attempt to reach better light. Near the forest floor, direct sunlight may arrive only in brief patches. Leaves from shrubs, saplings, and mature trees intercept much of the light before it reaches the soil. A young climbing shoot must keep growing while its own leaves are still working under those dim conditions. Every new part carries a cost. A leaf needs water, minerals, sugars, and living tissue before it can begin paying back that investment through photosynthesis. A stem also requires material, though a thin extension can cross more distance with less mass than a broad new leaf. Many vines respond by producing long sections of stem between their leaves. These sections are called internodes. A node is the point where a leaf, bud, branch, or tendril joins the stem. The internode is the length between one node and the next. When internodes grow longer, the plant can place its newest tip farther ahead, without building a large leaf at every short interval. That keeps the searching end relatively light. A heavy tip would bend downward sooner under its own weight. A lighter shoot can project through a gap, circle through nearby space, and reach another branch before gravity pulls it toward the ground. The vine still needs leaves behind the tip. Those existing leaves produce the sugars that support new growth. Stored energy in the seed, roots, or older stem may also help during the earliest stage. The plant is balancing extension against the need to maintain enough leaf area to keep producing energy. Direction comes from several signals working together. Light influences growth through phototropism. Phototropism means that a plant changes its direction of growth in response to light. Cells on the shaded side of a young shoot may lengthen differently from cells on the brighter side, causing the tip to bend toward a stronger light source. Gravity provides another signal through gravitropism. Gravitropism is growth directed in relation to gravity. Roots usually show positive gravitropism by growing downward. Young shoots generally show negative gravitropism by growing upward. A climbing stem combines these directional responses with circumnutation, the slow circling movement already carrying its tip through space. The result is rarely a straight climb. A shoot may rise, lean toward a brighter opening, circle around a nearby stem, then shift again as the support changes position. Light and gravity influence the same growing tissues. Their effects overlap rather than operating as separate steering systems. Wind can move the support between one hour and the next. A leaf above may block light that reached the shoot earlier in the day. The vine keeps adjusting through continued growth. Some searches still fail. A shoot may extend into open space and find no branch within reach. Its own weight can gradually lower it until the stem rests on the soil. For certain species, that contact creates another opportunity. Nodes touching moist ground may produce roots. This is called clonal rooting because the new rooted section remains genetically identical to the original plant. English ivy can root where creeping stems contact suitable soil. Many other spreading vines use the same general method, though the ability varies greatly among species. A rooted node can absorb its own water and minerals. It may also produce a new upward shoot, giving the plant another starting point after the first search failed. Other vines recover by activating a bud lower on the stem. A fresh searcher grows outward from that node, while the older tip slows, breaks, or lies across the ground. Reaching one shrub still does not guarantee access to the canopy. The shrub may rise only 2 meters. Its highest branches might end beneath a taller sapling. The vine must continue from one support to another, building a connected route through the vegetation. A tendril secures one section. New internodes carry the tip farther. Another coil may attach to the next branch above. Over time, the plant can move from low ground cover into shrubs, then from shrubs into young trees, before finally entering the crown of a mature tree. The root may contain dozens of separate attachments. Each one supports part of the distance already crossed and allows the newest growth to keep searching ahead. The climb ends one kind of problem and creates a very different environment. Above the lower leaves, sunlight becomes stronger, wind becomes more constant, and the surrounding air may be warmer and drier during the day. For some vines, arrival in that brighter canopy changes the shape of the leaves, the behavior of the stems, and the plant's entire pattern of growth. The climbing shoot enters a brighter layer of the forest and begins receiving sunlight for much longer parts of the day. Leaves that once formed beneath heavy shade now face direct light, moving air, and faster changes in temperature. Humidity may fall during the afternoon, as wind carries moisture away from exposed surfaces. The vine has reached the conditions that made its long climb worthwhile. More light allows its leaves to carry out photosynthesis at a higher rate, as long as water remains available and the tissues do not overheat. Sugars produced in the canopy can support new leaves, thicker stems, flowers, and fruit. For some climbing plants, the change in surroundings also helps trigger a different stage of development. A plant that has spent years searching and attaching may begin producing shoots with a new shape and purpose. This change is known as heteroblasty. Heteroblasty occurs when one plant produces clearly different leaves or growth forms as it moves through stages of its life. The change can involve leaf shape, stem behavior, rooting ability, and reproduction. English ivy gives one of the clearest examples. A young ivy plant usually begins in its juvenile vegetative phase. Vegetative growth is growth devoted mainly to stems, leaves, and roots rather than flowers. Juvenile ivy leaves commonly have several pointed lobes. The shape is familiar from ivy-covered trees and walls, with one central lobe and smaller lobes spreading to either side. Its stems creep across the ground or climb upward. Short aerial roots form along the side facing the support. These roots grip bark, stone, and masonry, while the stem continues extending. Juvenile ivy also roots readily when a stem touches moist soil. That ability helps the plant spread across the ground and recover after parts are broken. The adult reproductive phase looks different enough that it can seem like a separate plant. Adult shoots often extend outward from the support instead of pressing closely against it. Their growth becomes more upright and bush-like. The leaves lose the deep lobes of the juvenile stage and develop a simpler oval or diamond-like shape. Aerial attachment roots no longer form along these reproductive shoots. Their ability to root from cut pieces also becomes much weaker. Small greenish-yellow flowers appear in rounded clusters. These flowers usually open late in the growing season, often during autumn in temperate regions. That timing makes ivy an important late source of nectar and pollen for insects when many other plants have already finished flowering. Bees, hoverflies, wasps, and other visitors gather around the flower clusters. After pollination, the plant produces dark berries that ripen during winter or early spring. Birds eat the fruit and carry the seeds away from the parent vine. The change between juvenile and adult growth depends on more than one signal. The plant must reach a suitable developmental age. Strong light commonly supports the transition after the vine has climbed beyond deep shade. Hormones and patterns of gene activity change inside the growing tips, altering which tissues develop and what form they take. A Forest Service review described ivy entering its adult phase in one French forest after climbing roughly 15 to 20 meters. At that height, the vines had reached brighter parts of the tree crowns. The exact height is not fixed. An older ivy growing on a sunny wall may form adult shoots much lower down. A shaded plant can remain juvenile for longer, even after producing a considerable length of stem. Environmental position and developmental condition work together. English ivy commonly climbs to around 30 meters when tall supports are available. Exceptional vines have been reported much higher on large conifers. The plant remains rooted near the ground while its reproductive branches spread into sunlight far above. Water must still travel upward through the xylem, and sugars from the sunlit leaves move through the phloem toward roots and younger shoots. The body now connects two very different environments. Its roots occupy shaded soil where temperatures change slowly. Its flowers may open high in a crown exposed to wind and direct sun. The climb has therefore changed more than the vine's location. Juvenile structures suited to creeping, gripping, and finding support give way to adult growth suited to flowering and seed production. One climbing plant has completed this transition on a single tree. Across a tropical forest, thousands of woody vines may be following similar routes through different trunks and crowns, forming an entire climbing layer above the soil. From the crown of one mature climber, the view widens across an entire tropical forest. Thick woody vines rise from the soil, follow tree trunks into the canopy, and disappear among leaves far overhead. Some cross from one crown into another. Others hang downward in long loops before curving back toward the ground. These woody climbers are called lianas. Their roots remain in the soil, while their stems use trees as the framework that carries their leaves toward sunlight. A large liana can become thicker than a person's arm, yet its path through the forest may be difficult to follow. The stem visible at ground level might enter one tree, cross several branches, and appear again many meters away. Fallen leaves and branches can hide lower sections. A stem may split into several roots, while one genetic individual produces several rooted stems. This makes counting lianas more complicated than counting trees. A tree usually has one obvious trunk rising from one rooted position. A liana may touch the soil in several places. Some stems root after reaching the ground again, creating new supply points while remaining connected to older growth. Researchers, therefore, need clear rules about what they are measuring. They may count every rooted stem above a chosen diameter, even when several stems could belong to the same individual plant. One of the most detailed surveys took place on Barro Colorado Island in Panama. The island lies within Rattan Lake, part of the Panama Canal system. Its tropical forest has been studied for more than a century. Within a 50-hectare research plot, scientists had already mapped and measured the trees. 50 hectares covers half a square kilometer, an area about the size of 70 football fields. Researchers then mapped every rooted liana stem measuring at least 1 centimeter in diameter. The work required following stems through dense undergrowth, checking where they entered the soil, and identifying species from leaves, bark, flowers, or fruits. By the end of the survey, the plot contained 67,447 rooted liana stems. Those stems belong to 162 species. The numbers reveal how much climbing growth can be packed into one forest. Lianas represented nearly 1/4 of all woody stems in the plot. They also accounted for about 35% of the woody plant species. More than 1 out of every 3 woody species recorded there followed a climbing way of life. Their share of the forest's thick stem material was much smaller. lianas contributed only about 3% of the total basal area. Basal area is the combined cross-sectional area of plant stems, usually measured near the ground. It gives researchers a practical estimate of how much space is occupied by trunks and stems. Trees dominated this measurement because they build wide columns of wood. Lianas reach the same canopy with much less thick supporting tissue. That contrast carries the climbing strategy from one plant to the scale of an ecosystem. A forest can contain tens of thousands of liana stems and more than 100 climbing species, while most of its heavy wood remains inside trees. The lianas invest in long, flexible roots, numerous leaves, and access to supports already standing. Their low share of basal area does not make them a minor part of the canopy. A slender stem rooted far below may spread a broad crown of leaves across the top of a tree. Several lianas can occupy the same host. Their leaves may mix with tree foliage so completely that identifying them from the ground becomes difficult. Tropical forests vary greatly. Some wetter forests contain fewer lianas, while seasonal forests with stronger dry periods may contain more. Disturbed areas and forest edges can also support dense climbing growth. Across many tropical sites, lianas make up roughly 1/4 or more of woody stems and species, though the exact proportion changes with rainfall, soil, forest age, and disturbance. The Barrow, Colorado numbers give one carefully measured example rather than a universal formula. Even so, they show the scale clearly. A climbing habit that began with one thin shoot has produced a second architecture woven through the trees. This architecture uses relatively little thick wood, yet it fills the forest with long connections. Where one liana crosses from tree to tree, separate crowns become joined by living bridges that animals can travel, shelter within, and use to reach food. A squirrel steps onto a woody liana stretched between two neighboring crowns. The stem bends slightly beneath its weight, yet the surrounding branches keep the root suspended high above the forest floor. A gap that would otherwise require a leap has become a narrow path. Several meters below, another liana crosses in a different direction. Smaller stems form side roots through leaves and hanging roots. Together, these crossings change the shape of the canopy for every animal capable of using them. Tree crowns often appear connected from the ground, though open air may separate their outer branches. A monkey reaching the edge of one crown may find the nearest tree too far away for a safe jump. A liana can close part of that distance. Some stems stretch directly between trees. Others create hanging loops that an animal can climb down and then back upward. Multiple crossings allow movement through the forest without a return to the soil. Remaining above the ground can reduce exposure to certain predators and save the energy required to descend a trunk before climbing another. The value of a root depends on the animal using it. A broad woody liana may carry a monkey or porcupine. Thin tangled growth can support lizards, insects, and small mammals. Snakes may use the same stems to approach resting places or bird nests. The canopy becomes a network of paths with different widths, angles, and levels of concealment. Food is also concentrated along these routes. Many lianas produce flowers in the sunlit canopy, where bees, butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, or bats can reach them. The exact pollinator depends on the species. Open flowers may supply pollen as well as nectar. Developing fruits later attract birds and mammals, which carry seeds away from the parent plant in their droppings, or by dropping partly eaten fruit. Leaves create another food source. Caterpillars and beetles feed on vine tissue. Sap-sucking insects pierce stems or leaves, while spiders build webs between nearby growth. Insect-eating birds can search the same tangle for prey. Bark, dead leaves, and small pockets of trapped plant material add places where fungi and tiny invertebrates can develop. A dense mass of vines also changes shelter. Branches and leaves break up an animal's outline, making it harder to see from a distance. Birds may place nests inside tangled growth because several stems support the nest from different directions. Small mammals can rest on a broad vine or hide where many stems cross. Habitat complexity is the term ecologists use for this increase in physical layers, surfaces, and hiding places. More structure can create more ways for animals to move and feed. The effect remains different from one forest to another. A dense tangle may help a small bird remain concealed, while making flight difficult for a larger one. The same stem that allows a monkey to cross between trees may also help a predator approach. Heavy vine growth can reduce open space inside a crown or change which branches remain usable. The consequences depend on the vine species, the animal, and the surrounding forest. A study in Peru gives a measurable example of how strongly mammals use connections between crowns. Researchers monitored 13 natural canopy bridges that had been preserved above a cleared route through the forest. These bridges were formed mainly by connected tree branches rather than lianas alone, so the study did not directly measure the effect of woody vines. It still showed the importance of overhead continuity. Across 7,102 camera-trapped nights, the cameras recorded 25 mammal species from 12 families using the bridges. A camera-trapped night means one camera operating for one night. This unit allows researchers to compare monitoring effort across several locations. Crossing rates in the canopy were more than 100 times higher than crossing rates recorded on the ground below. For many arboreal mammals, a connected route overhead was far more useful than descending into the open space beneath it. Lianas can preserve or increase that kind of connection in places where neighboring branches do not meet. Their contribution reaches beyond one pathway. Flowers draw pollinators toward the stem. Fruit brings seed dispersers into the crown. Insects gather across leaves and bark, followed by animals that feed on them. The vine becomes part of the forest's movement and food systems while remaining anchored in soil far below. Every suspended root still rests on living trees. Branches carry the added weight of stems and leaves, while the liana's canopy competes for sunlight above and water beneath the soil. The same structure that opens a road for an animal can quietly increase the load borne by the tree holding it in the air. That added load continues from the upper branches all the way down through the trunk and roots. A large liana may rest across several limbs, while its own leaves spread through the crown. Ecologists sometimes call such a plant a structural parasite. The phrase describes a climber that uses another plant's body for support. Most lianas do not pierce the host tree and remove sap directly. Their cost comes through competition and physical strain. High in the canopy, liana leaves can spread over the host's foliage. A leaf covered by another leaf receives less light. With less light, it carries out less photosynthesis, the process that turns carbon dioxide and water into sugar. Lower sugar production leaves the tree with less energy for new wood, roots, flowers, seeds, and repair. The competition continues beneath the soil. Liana roots occupy many of the same layers used by tree roots. Both plants draw water from the ground. They also take up dissolved mineral nutrients, including nitrogen and phosphorus, which are needed for growth. During a dry season, the available water may fall for weeks or months. A well-established liana can continue supplying a large canopy, while the tree beside it faces the same limited reservoir. Physical pressure adds another cost. A woody vine becomes heavier as its stem thickens and its crown expands. Branches bend under that mass. Young tree trunks can grow around tight coils and become misshapen. Several trees may also be tied together by one liana that crosses from crown to crown. When wind moves those trees in different directions, the connecting stem transfers force between them. If one tree falls, attached lianas can pull on neighboring branches and sometimes carry additional trees or limbs downward. Researchers measured these combined effects in a large experiment on Panama's Gigante Peninsula. They established 16 forest plots. Each plot measured 80 meters by 80 meters, covering 0.64 hectares. All lianas were cut in 8 plots. The other 8 plots remained untreated and served as controls. A control provides the comparison needed to see what changes when one condition is altered. The experiment continued for 3 years. Researchers measured tree growth and the arrival of new trees, known as recruitment. They recorded mortality when trees died. They also collected fallen leaves, flowers, twigs, and other material in traps. This falling plant matter is called litterfall. Repeated stem measurements showed how much woody biomass the forest gained or lost. Biomass means the total amount of living material. The difference between the two groups became clear. Trees grew more strongly where lianas had been removed. More carbon entered long-lasting woody tissue. Where lianas remained, a larger share of forest production went into leaves and other material that falls and decomposes relatively quickly. The forest containing lianas achieved only about 24% of the carbon sink potential measured in the removal plots. A carbon sink absorbs more carbon than it releases over a given period. This result came from one experiment in one Panamanian forest. The exact percentage should not be applied to every tropical forest. Rainfall, soil, liana abundance, tree species, and disturbance history all change the outcome. The mechanism behind the result is still broadly important. A tree stores large amounts of carbon in dense wood that may remain standing for decades. A liana produces much less thick support wood because it borrows the tree's structure. When the liana reduces tree growth, the forest loses some of the wood production that would have stored carbon for longer periods. The climber's own leaves and slender stems do not fully replace that lost storage. Competition can also reduce flowering and seed production. A shaded or water-stressed tree may produce fewer fruits. Young saplings growing beneath dense vine cover may survive more slowly or fail to reach the canopy. Over time, these effects can influence which tree species remain common and how quickly the forest replaces lost trunks. the vine still provides flowers, fruit, shelter, and canopy roots for many organisms. Its presence changes several relationships at once. The borrowed structure carries a real biological cost for the tree that built it. That cost becomes especially important after the canopy is opened. A fallen tree, logging trail, or forest edge brings strong light into lower vegetation and fills the gap with young flexible supports, creating conditions in which climbing plants can spread quickly. A tree pulled down by wind leaves more than an empty space in the canopy. Sunlight that once stopped against leaves 30 meters above the ground now reaches shrubs, seedlings, and vines below. The fallen crown may crush part of the vegetation, while broken branches create a rough field of new supports. Within days, dormant buds can begin growing. Over the following months, young trees send thin stems into the opening, and established lianas spread new shoots across the brighter gap. Forest ecologists call this kind of opening a treefall gap. Such gaps are a normal part of tropical forests. Trees die from age, disease, lightning, drought, or storm damage. Their fall creates a temporary patch where light is stronger and competition changes quickly. A liana, already rooted near the gap, does not need to begin again from a seed. Its roots and older stems may have stored water and sugars. New growth can enter the opening, while young trees are still building the trunks that will support them. The gap also contains many narrow stems, saplings, broken branches, and regenerating shrubs provide supports that are easier to encircle than the broad trunks of mature trees. A twining shoot can wrap around them. Tendrils can fasten to their branches. Scrambling vines can rest across several young plants at once. Human activity creates similar conditions across much larger areas. A logging road cuts a bright strip through continuous forest. An agricultural field creates a long border where forest meets open land. Pipelines and power corridors can hold vegetation in a permanently low, disturbed state. When one large forest is divided into smaller fragments, each piece gains more exposed edge compared with its interior. Edges receive stronger sunlight from the side. Wind enters more easily and removes moisture from leaves and soil. Afternoon temperatures may rise, while humidity can fall faster than it does beneath a closed canopy. These changes often favor plants able to extend rapidly through open space. Lianas are generally more abundant in tropical forests than in temperate ones. Within the tropics, they are often especially common in seasonal or somewhat drier forests. Younger forests and disturbed edges also tend to contain more climbing growth than old shaded interiors. These are broad patterns rather than fixed rules. Rainfall, soil, elevation, and the species present can change the result. Clonal growth gives some vines another advantage after disturbance. A stem lying across the ground may produce roots at a node where it touches moist soil. The newly rooted section remains part of the same genetic individual, yet it can gather water and minerals from an additional location. If the original connection is damaged, the rooted section may survive and continue growing. Other species resprout from underground crowns or old woody stems after cutting or treefall. This ability allows established vines to return quickly after the surrounding vegetation has been opened. Long-term records from Barro Colorado Island in Panama show how strongly liana populations can change. Researchers followed vegetation inside the same 50-hectare forest plot for roughly 30 years. During that period, the density of liana stems at least 1 centimeter in diameter increased by about 75%. Larger stems, measuring at least 5 centimeters across, increased by nearly 140%. Tree density in the plot declined by about 11.5% over the same general period. Those figures describe one carefully monitored forest. They do not prove that the same trend is occurring everywhere. Liana increases have been recorded in several parts of the neotropics, the tropical regions of the Americas. Other tropical forests have shown weaker changes or different patterns. Researchers are still separating the causes. Disturbance can increase available light and create young supports. Longer or stronger dry seasons may favor species able to reach deep water or maintain leaves under seasonal stress. Some lianas transport water efficiently through their stems, though drought tolerance varies greatly among species. A vine that performs well during one kind of dry period may still suffer during an extreme drought. Forest age also matters. Young, recovering forests usually contain many slender stems and open patches. Fragmentation adds more edges, while logging repeatedly creates gaps. Rising carbon dioxide has been proposed as another possible influence, because fast-growing vines may respond strongly when carbon becomes more available. Evidence for that effect remains mixed, and carbon dioxide acts alongside rainfall, soil, temperature, and disturbance. The increase observed in any one forest may therefore come from several pressures working together. A climbing strategy shaped by natural tree falls now operates in landscapes where openings are created more often and remain open for longer. The same ability to exploit light, narrow supports, and stored roots can become especially effective along roads and human-made boundaries. People have also learned to create supports for vines on purpose. Poles, wires, living trees, and wooden frames turn the vine's need for outside structure into a method for producing food, flavor, and useful materials. A trellis turns the vine's need for support into a form of agriculture. Posts, wires, poles, strings, and living trees give climbing plants a route that is stable, easy to manage, and placed where sunlight is available. The basic design copies what vines already do in forests. A grapevine trained along wire uses the frame much as a wild vine would use neighboring branches. A bean pole replaces a young tree stem. A row of hop strings creates dozens of narrow vertical supports that new shoots can follow each spring. Grapevines are among the oldest climbing plants shaped by human cultivation. A major genetic study found evidence for 2 centers of domestication, beginning about 11,000 years ago. One developed in Western Asia. The other formed in the Caucasus, the mountainous region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. These early domestication histories contributed differently to later table grapes and wine grapes. People selected plants with larger fruit, better flavor, reliable yields, and traits that made harvesting easier. Wild grapevines often climb high into trees and spread their fruit across the canopy. Cultivated vines are usually trained lower. Growers guide the stems along wires, remove unwanted shoots, and prune older growth so that sunlight and air can reach the developing clusters. The plant still follows its climbing biology, though its route is now carefully planned. Beans use several methods. Many pole beans wind their stems around narrow supports. Peas use tendrils that fasten to mesh, twigs, or strings. Cucumbers and gourds send out coiling tendrils from their nodes. A simple frame lifts their leaves and fruit away from damp soil, where contact can increase the risk of rot or damage. Vertical growth can also make harvesting easier and allow more plants to occupy a small area. Hops follow tall strings in fields called hop yards. The young stems, often called bines, wrap around their supports as they grow. Commercial systems may guide them several meters upward before flowering structures form near the top. Workers lower the plants or cut the vines during harvest, so the cone-shaped flowers can be collected for brewing. Black pepper uses another climbing method. Its stems produce adventitious roots that grip tree bark or planted supports. In many tropical farms, pepper vines are trained around living trees or upright posts. The small fruits grow in narrow clusters and are harvested at different stages to produce black, green, or white pepper. Vanilla adds a more delicate partnership. Vanilla is a climbing orchid that can extend for roughly 15 meters. Its fleshy aerial roots hold the stem against trees or support frames. The flowers open one at a time and remain receptive for only a short period. Within the plant's native range, certain insects can pollinate them. Commercial vanilla is now grown far beyond those original pollinator relationships, so most flowers are pollinated by hand. A practical hand pollination method was developed on the island of Réunion in 1841 by Edmund Albius. He was a young enslaved worker at the time. His method used a small tool or finger to lift the thin membrane separating the flower's male and female parts, allowing pollen to be pressed into place. The technique transformed vanilla production. Each flower still has to be visited individually, often during the morning on the day it opens. Successful pollination produces a long green fruit, commonly called a vanilla bean. The fruit contains thousands of tiny seeds. After harvest, the pods are cured through carefully controlled stages of heating, sweating, drying, and storage, which allow the familiar aroma to develop. Rattan provides a different kind of value. Rattans are climbing palms with long, flexible stems. Nearly 500 species are known across tropical Africa and Asia. Their canes can be cut into long lengths and bent without breaking as easily as ordinary wood. People use them for baskets, furniture, binding, and construction. The international cane trade is worth billions of dollars, and much of the material still comes from wild forests. This creates pressure in places where harvesting removes stems faster than the plants can replace them. Cultivation works best when growers understand the vine's original strategy. Supports guide extension. Pruning redirects growth. Hand pollination replaces a missing animal partner. Harvesting takes advantage of fruit, flowers, or flexible stem tissue. The borrowed skeleton becomes a planned exchange. People supply the framework, and vines return grapes, beans, spices, vanilla, and cane. That partnership can change when a climbing plant is moved beyond the insects, competitors, diseases, and climate limits that once kept its growth in balance. A vine trained carefully in one region can escape cultivation elsewhere and begin using entire landscapes as its support. Kudzu shows how quickly a useful climbing plant can move beyond the boundaries people first gave it. The vine is native to East Asia and was displayed in the United States at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876. Its broad leaves and fragrant purple flowers made it attractive as an ornamental plant. During the early 20th century, farmers also planted kudzu for livestock forage and erosion control. Its long stems covered exposed soil, while its deep root system helped hold slopes in place. Government programs encouraged planting across parts of the southeastern United States. Once established, kudzu could continue spreading without further help. It is a perennial vine, meaning that its underground structures survive from year to year. Large crowns at the base store energy and produce fresh shoots during the growing season. Those shoots travel across the ground or climb through shrubs and trees. Where a node touches suitable soil, new roots can form. The rooted section remains genetically identical to the original plant and can begin producing additional growth. This clonal spread allows one established patch to expand from several points at once. Kudzu also produces a large amount of leaf surface. Its compound leaves form broad layers over lower vegetation. When several stems climb the same shrub or young tree, the leaves can create a dense cover above the host's own foliage. Less sunlight reaches the plant underneath. Photosynthesis falls, growth slows, and smaller plants may eventually die beneath the shade. The vine also adds physical weight to branches and connects neighboring plants through tangled stems. Descriptions of kudzu sometimes rely on old estimates claiming that it covers enormous parts of the American South. Those figures often combine scattered records, roadside observations, and rough projections. Modern map totals vary according to the definition of an infestation and the quality of local surveys. Kudzu remains a serious invasive plant in many areas, though its coverage is uneven, rather than forming one continuous blanket. English ivy follows a different pattern after escaping cultivation. Its stems can spread horizontally across the ground and root at many points. Once a stem reaches a tree, wall, or rock, adventitious roots hold it against the surface. In some regions outside its native range, thick ivy growth can cover the forest floor and reduce the space available for native seedlings. Climbing stems may also add weight to trees and increase the surface exposed to wind. The effect varies with climate, forest type, tree health, and the density of the ivy. A light covering on a sturdy tree creates a different condition from a mature mass reaching through most of the crown. Both kudzu and ivy use other plants mainly for structure. Dodder has a more direct relationship with its host. Dodder belongs to the genus Cuscuta and begins as a thin seedling with very limited roots. The young stem circles until it touches a suitable plant. It then coils around the host and produces specialized organs called haustoria. A haustorium grows into the host's tissues and connects with its transport systems. Water and dissolved minerals can be drawn from xylem. Sugars and other compounds can be taken from phloem. After these connections become established, the dodder's original root may die. The parasite continues growing as a web of yellow, orange, or reddish stems across the host. This is physiological parasitism, because the plant removes resources directly from another plant's body. An ordinary liana creates competition while remaining supplied by its own roots. Dodder forms an internal connection and withdraws part of what the host has collected or produced. Strangler figs are also commonly grouped with vines because their roots wrap around tree trunks. Their life history follows another route. A bird or bat may deposit a fig seed high in the fork of a tree. The seed germinates above the ground and begins as a hemiepiphyte. A hemiepiphyte spends part of its life growing on another plant, while eventually connecting with the soil. Roots descend from the young fig toward the forest floor. Once they reach the ground, they thicken and begin carrying more water and minerals upward. Additional roots grow around the host trunk and may join together. Over many years, the fig creates a woody framework capable of supporting its own crown. The host can suffer from crowding, root competition, heavy shade, and pressure from the expanding root network. The strangler fig eventually becomes structurally self-supporting. That development separates it from a true liana, which continues relying on outside support through most of its life. Kudzu, ivy, dodder, and strangler figs can all spread across the body of another plant. Their biological relationships remain distinct. One may become invasive after escaping cultivation. Another competes through shade and weight. A parasite enters the host's conducting tissues, while a hemiepiphyte gradually builds its own supporting framework. Effective management begins by identifying which process is actually occurring. Some native vines support animals and increase canopy connections. Invasive climbers may require removal before they spread farther. Parasitic plants and strangler figs call for different decisions again. The same precision also guides conservation, forest research, and the growing effort to copy climbing plants in human engineering. That precision shapes how forests are now studied and managed. A native liana carrying fruit through a tropical canopy serves a different role from kudzu spreading along a roadside. Dodder requires a different response from English ivy, while a strangler fig follows its own long path from the tree crown to the soil. Each relationship begins with a particular mechanism, and effective decisions depend on identifying it correctly. Researchers return to permanent forest plots every few years and measure the same stems again. Metal tags give individual trees and lianas identification numbers. Scientists record stem diameter, growth, mortality, and the appearance of new rooted shoots. Repeated censuses can reveal whether lianas are becoming more common, whether larger stems are increasing, and which tree species carry the heaviest loads. Canopy photographs add information that cannot be gathered easily from the ground. Researchers compare the amount of foliage belonging to trees and climbing plants. Drones can survey larger areas, while cameras mounted on towers record changes through seasons or after storms. Terrestrial laser scanners provide an even more detailed view. These instruments send out large numbers of laser pulses and measure how long each reflection takes to return. The result is a three-dimensional map containing trunks, branches, gaps, and layers of vegetation. A dense liana tangle changes the pattern of return points, allowing researchers to estimate how climbing plants alter the vertical structure of a forest. Removal experiments provide a different kind of evidence. Lianas may be cut from selected plots, while similar plots remain unchanged. Tree growth, leaf production, mortality, and carbon storage can then be compared over several years. Forest models are also becoming more precise. Older vegetation models often represented tropical forests, mainly through trees. Newer versions can include lianas as a separate plant type, with their own patterns of growth, attachment, leaf production, water use, and competition for light. These models help researchers explore how drought, disturbance, and rising temperatures may change the balance between climbing plants and trees. Management follows the same need for detail. A restoration project may remove lianas from young trees that are struggling to rebuild a damaged canopy. Foresters sometimes cut heavy vines from selected timber trees years before harvest, allowing the crowns to separate and reducing the chance that several trees will be pulled down together. Native climbers can still be preserved in other parts of the forest because their flowers, fruit, and tangled stems support animals. An invasive vine spreading beyond cultivation may need repeated cutting, root removal, or careful treatment of persistent crowns. A parasitic plant already connected to a host's tissues presents a different problem again. The biology determines the method. The same climbing solutions are now influencing machines. Growbot research has explored artificial stems and tendrils designed to extend, surge, attach, and intertwine with their surroundings. A climbing robot can be built with a light advancing tip, rather than a heavy, rigid frame. Some vine-like robots move through pressure-driven eversion. In this process, flexible material turns outward at the front as the machine advances. The body lengthens from its tip instead of dragging its entire outer surface through a narrow space. That approach can reduce friction inside pipes, rubble, or confined passages. Tendril-inspired devices add attachment. 1 mm scale soft robot demonstrated roughly 5-fold reversible stiffening and around 500 degrees of rotation. A flexible structure could curl around a small support, become firmer after contact, and loosen again when conditions changed. Other designs explore branching tips, soft grippers, and coils that respond to heat, pressure, or fluid movement. These machines remain engineered systems, though their basic problems are familiar. They must cross space without carrying a large supporting frame. They need to detect useful structures and attach without damaging them. They benefit from staying flexible during movement and becoming stronger after reaching a destination. A vine solved those connected problems through living growth. The original shoot near the soil began with limited wood and a narrow supply of stored energy. Long internodes carried its tip through shade. Unequal cell growth swept that tip across nearby space. Touch changed ion movement, water pressure, and growth along a tendril. A coil transferred weight to a branch, while xylem continued lifting water toward new leaves. Reaching the canopy brought stronger light and a wider ecological effect. The vine became food, shelter, competition, and a physical connection between trees. Its success came from a redistribution of work. The plant supplied extension, sensing, attachment, transport, and foliage. Its surroundings supplied much of the vertical frame. High above the soil, one slender stem can spread leaves through a patch of sunlight, while resting on a trunk many times thicker than itself. The trunk belongs to another plant. Every root, vessel, leaf, coil, and measured pull that carried the vine into that light belongs to the climber.